Good day everyone, my name is Kenneth CABAHUG and we'll be discussing the topics of semi-final week 3, which are the global demography, global migration, and the global citizenship. But before we start, we have here our learning objectives. So the first learning objective is to identify the attributes of a global city and analyze how the cities serve as engines of the globalization. Second is to explain the theory of demographic transitions as it affects the global population. Third is to analyze the political, economic, cultural, and social factors underlying the global movements of the people and display first-hand knowledge of the experiences of the OFWs. And lastly is to articulate a personal definition of global citizenship and appreciate the ethical obligations of global citizenship. So the first topic that we will discuss is the global demography. So when we say demography, it is basically the study of human populations. So specifically, their size, composition, distribution across the space, and the process through which population change. So we have here the big three of the demography, which are the death, births, and the migration. So they are the factors producing population stability or change. So population growth between developed and developing countries reflects the existence of considerably heterogeneity in the birth, death, and migration processes, both over time and across national populations, races, and ethnic groups. The disparity has coincided with the changes in the age group composition populations. An overview of these factors illuminates the mechanisms of the global population growth and change. So I have here a video that will briefly explain the demography and the population.
Hey, you look like a handsome young guy who wants to know what demography is all about.
Yes, actually, I would.
Great. Now let's get started. Demographic change concerns everyone. No matter what age, gender, or where he or she comes from. How a society is shaped and what effects it has on the future are big questions within demographic work. Demographic change can mean many things, from aging in society to you starting a family. But let's look at the bigger picture. Did you know that just by being alive means that you are a part of society? In order to understand how you fit into this societal equation, it is important to know what that means for you personally and globally. So, to have a great impact, it starts with being aware of your surroundings. Ultimately, you are the ones who affect demography now and in the future.
That's nice to know, but why should I be interested in my role and participation in society?
Well, it's because the young population is most affected from changes in the society. It's your future we're talking about. But demography is not just about the bigger picture. It has many parts to it. And to get in touch with these topics, you can now download the app, A Life Journey. The app can be downloaded for free from the App Store for use on your iPhone or iPad. It's easy to use and understand so that the young and old can learn together.
How do populations work? In biology, a population is all the organisms of the same group or species which live in a particular geographical area and have the capability of interbreeding. So what causes a population to increase? Two things that cause a population to increase are birth rates and immigration. With every birth inside of the particular species, populations grow and increase in size. Immigration also affects the growth of the population by adding to the existing size. But what causes a population to decrease? Death rates and emigration are two components that play a role in lowering growth rates. Death rates are the rate at which the individuals in a population die. If it is larger than the birth rate, then the population will decrease. Emigration can also cause a population to decrease, because it means that individuals are leaving or moving away from their home population. Species grow at different speeds. So how do we categorize the speed that these populations increase and decrease at? One categorized speed is exponential growth. Exponential growth is the increase of a population that grows more and more rapidly. This occurs when the needed resources of the population becomes unlimited. Another speed is logistic growth. In contrast to exponential growth, logistic growth is the decrease of a population. Populations are measured in geographic ranges. A geographic range is the place that a population lives in. The species inhabiting a geographic range can spread throughout them in different densities. These densities are categorized into 3 different types. The first is random, where the population is spaced across a geographic range unevenly. The second is uniform, where the population is spaced across a geographic range evenly. And the third is clumped, where several individuals of a population are packed closely together. One thing that all geographic ranges have in common is carrying capacity. Carrying capacity is the number of individuals of a species that an environment can support. Carrying capacity is determined by limiting factors. The limiting factors keep the population from increasing. There are 2 types of limiting factors. The first is density-dependent limiting factors, which are factors that operate more strongly when population densities are high. Examples of this are stress from overcrowding, parasitism, and disease. And for animals, density-dependent limiting factors can unbalance the predator-prey relationship as well. The second is density-independent limiting factors. Density-independent limiting factors are limiting factors that can affect any population, regardless of its size and density. Examples of density-independent limiting factors include natural disasters, such as floods, famine, tornadoes, hurricanes, droughts. If a natural disaster is drastic enough, it can wipe out entire geographic ranges and can cause entire species extinctions. Extinction can also occur if a carrying capacity drops low enough. So how do we compare population growth over time? Those who are specifically interested in human population growth go into the science of demography. Demography takes in information about populations, such as limiting factors and carrying capacities, and use it to determine the cause of demographic shifts and to predict future populations. These demographers have studied the growth patterns of the populations of the US and South America and have come up with a hypothesis to explain these countries' shifts in population size. They call it demographic transition. There are 5 stages in the demographic transition hypothesis. The first is a stable population with a slow increase. The second stage is a very rapid increase. The third stage is a slowing increase. Fourthly, the population decreases and then stabilizes. For the 5th stage, the population either remains stable or starts to decline slowly. But what about the rest of the world? Are they a part of demographic transition? The answer is no. India, China, and the sub-Saharan Africa all have rapidly growing populations. By studying age structures, demographers can predict the future populations of these countries. They use age structure diagrams that use gender and age to determine how large of a population it will become in the future. They use the ratio of children to adults. If there are more children than adults, then the population will increase in the future. And if there are less children in that population than adults, then it will decrease in the future. But of course, not everything can be predicted. Natural disasters are bound to happen, but even though demography can't show us everything about the future, it can help us learn from the past. And just by watching this presentation, you have taken your first step into a larger world, a world of populations.
Now we'll go back to this slide. So in the video, we have learned that the 2 factors that could lead to decrease in population are the death and the immigration. So meanwhile, the 2 factors that leads to increase in population are the birth and the migration. And speaking of migration, the next topic that we will discuss is all about the global migration. So when we say global migration, so it is a situation in which people go to live foreign countries, especially in order to find work. So most global migration is from developing countries to developed ones. So one negative effect of migration is that migration directly reduces the available supply of labor, particularly skilled laborers, and there are also positive effects such as true return migration and remittances. So why do people migrate? People migrate for many different reasons. These reasons can be classified as economic, social, political, and environmental. So economic migration refers to moving to find work or to follow particular career path. Social migration, on the other hand, is moving somewhere for a better quality of life or to be closer to family or friends. Political migration is moving to escape political persecution or war. And lastly is environmental migration. Environmental causes of migration include natural disasters such as flooding. So let us watch this video to further understand migration and its effect to every country.
Human mobility can have wide-ranging impacts both on the countries where migrants come from and the countries where migrants go. While a person or group's movements can be between towns or cities in the same country, researchers and policymakers alike are often interested in what happens when people migrate internationally or across an international country border. In this video, we will specifically examine the effects of international migration in the destination or host countries. Migration effects are observed at different levels of society and under a variety of circumstances. While this video is not meant to be a complete list of every effect host countries or locations will experience, it will summarize some of the most commonly discussed and researched outcomes. In general, there are effects that individual migrants or groups of migrants experience themselves in the destination country. There are also effects of migration on the communities where migrants live. And finally, there are macro-level effects felt at the country or regional level. The effects we will discuss here are of course the result of migration. Certain mechanisms or characteristics, however, have a more direct role in shaping these host country effects. For example, many of the innovation and labor market effects destination countries experience are caused by an increased presence of job-seeking immigrants. Important migrant characteristics that can affect outcomes are things like language abilities, levels of education, skills and qualifications, transnational ties to the origin, place, or community, and gender. Another important area to acknowledge relates to skills transfers. Migrants in host locations can impact parts of the economy, like through innovation, by transferring their knowledge, ideas, and even cultural values to the native population and thereby expanding the ways problems are approached and solved, or by creating new technologies. The effects migrants individually experience in host locations are often a result of specific characteristics. Firstly, a migrant's own skill set, educational qualifications, regularity of their immigration status, their country of origin, and aspirations play an important role in determining the type of employment, working conditions, and even social cohesion experienced in the destination. The approach a host society takes towards immigrants is also important, whether there is a welcoming culture or not. Additionally, immigrants whose qualifications are highly regarded by host countries may find more favorable employment conditions than those whose backgrounds are not as highly valued. If all goes well for migrants, they can experience many positive effects in a host country, like higher wages, better living conditions, safer environments, more rewarding jobs, and increased access to education and healthcare. On the other hand, migrants can face negative consequences. This is especially likely when migrants are either classified as unskilled or don't have the right permissions to stay and work in the country of destination. In these cases, it is likely for migrants to only find employment characterized by what we call the 4D jobs. These are dangerous, dirty, demeaning, and dull jobs. In addition to possible exploitation, migrants can face a decreased standard of living in the host society if they're under intense pressure to send cash remittances back to their place of origin, since this will decrease the funds available for them to live off of in the destination country. Despite these possible negative effects, there is research identifying some advantages migrants have when finding employment. This is because of the specific transferable knowledge migrants bring to host societies that gives them a comparative advantage over the native populations in certain sectors. Take food preparation and restaurant ownership. Immigrants have knowledge of the cultural dishes found in their places of origin, so they can specialize in making their native cuisine in the host society, since the local population would have less knowledge of how to prepare these foods. While immigrants can see positive benefits from such entrepreneurial activities, research has shown that this is less desired as an alternative to typical wage employment. Now let's broaden our scope to look at the effects immigrants can have on their immediate surroundings. Here, we will focus on effects at work and school. In the workplace, there is a large collection of research on migrants' effects on innovation. While innovation is a broad term describing how individuals, teams, and societies develop new ideas, devices, or methods to solve problems, we commonly see it measured as the number of patents a company files. Immigrants can transfer their knowledge and use their outside perspective to challenge their local counterparts on how to think differently than how they would typically in a group of like-minded natives. In fact, studies in the United States show that skilled migrants on average have higher patenting rates compared to the native population. Similar mechanisms, including positive competition, have been shown to increase educational learning and performance in more diverse educational settings. Think of how universities often promote the international character of their classroom, because they understand the value of students learning from each other who have different backgrounds. Now let's turn our attention to country-level effects like wages and labor market indicators. A common concern is that extra labor supply that immigration generates will drive wages down, since there may be more people competing for the same jobs. On one hand, immigrants themselves commonly face wage penalties, but the mechanisms causing this is less about inflows of job seekers and more about host country attitudes towards foreign qualifications. Foreign earned qualifications are often approached with skepticism by host country employers, who then often offer lower wages to employees who completed their training abroad. On the other hand, the idea that immigrants' presence drives down wages for host country populations has been disputed in several academic studies. Much of this research simply finds a net zero effect on wages, so neither positive nor negative. In addition, researchers routinely find that immigration offers complementary skills that can be applied side by side with the abilities of the native population. This basically results in specialization. Native-born workers are more likely to have communication-intensive positions that require high fluency in the host country's language, while immigrant workers tend to work in more research and development-intensive jobs that emphasize specific skills over communication. It often also results in immigrants working in the least skilled jobs where local populations do not want to work. Think about domestic work and agricultural work. Finally, a unique group of migrants that has been particularly studied in host countries are refugees. Since this population has been forced to flee from their origin due to a well-founded fear of persecution, the circumstances inciting their movement are certainly unique. In terms of the labor market, hosting refugees has been associated with increased likelihood of wage employment and a decrease in informality among highly skilled local workers. On the other hand, studies have observed competition between refugees and low-skilled local workers for employment. Whether or not this drives down unskilled wages is still a debated issue. Outside of the labor market, hosting refugees can affect social cohesion. While this is dependent on location and circumstances, evidence from countries like Rwanda and those in Northern Europe has not associated refugee hosting with a serious threat to social cohesion. Now that's a brief introduction to the effects of migration in destination countries. While there are certainly more effects and examples, these are some of the most researched and discussed. Keep an eye out for future in-depth videos where I will focus on specific effects one at a time. Until then, please give this video a thumbs up and share it around if you liked it. Don't forget to subscribe if you've not already and turn on the notifications so you never miss an update. See you next time.
Now, we will proceed to the last topic, which is the global citizenship. So, global citizenship is the idea that all people have civic responsibilities to the world as a whole, rather than just their local communities or countries. So, by expanding one's personal horizons through global learning, you are able to affect the change more meaningful sense in both small and large scale. So how does one become a global citizen? So what do you have to do in order to get this kind of global education and world mindset? So when people make decisions to become global citizens, they already have made a step in the right directions toward expanding their global awareness. But there are some things, both small and large, that you personally can do to take steps forward, creating global citizenship in your own life. So here are the few examples. So first is to learn about the world. So if you cannot visit a specific country or cultures, with the internet, you still have a way to learn and understand the experiences. So with this could be through reading, but also through connecting across the world and talking with them about your shared life experiences. So the next thing is to learn about yourself. So being a part of a community involves giving and receiving. So as you learn about the world, you will see some mindsets change, and you may see other desires to amplify. So the third is to travel. So one of the best way to become citizen of the world is naturally to go and see the world and travel across the globe. So last is to become a leader. So it is said that ideas don't change the world, leaders do. So leaders with more diverse life experiences and greater empathy are desperately needed. So by working on cultivating your personal leadership skills, you may be able to continue more through becoming a leader who can focus on their actions on things that feel most important to you. So to further understand global citizenship, so let us watch this video.
I want to introduce you to an amazing woman. Her name is Davinia. Davinia was born in Jamaica, emigrated to the US at the age of 18, and now lives just outside of Washington, D.C. She's not a high-powered political staffer, nor a lobbyist. She'd probably tell you she's quite unremarkable, but she's having the most remarkable impact. What's incredible about Davinia is that she's willing to spend time every single week focused on people who are not her. People not in her neighborhood, her state, nor even in her country. People she'd likely never meet. Davinia's impact started a few years ago when she reached out to all of her friends on Facebook and asked them to donate their pennies so she could fund girls' education. She wasn't expecting a huge response, but 700,000 pennies later, she's now sent over 120 girls to school. When we spoke last week, she told me she's become a little infamous at the local bank every time she rocks up with a shopping cart full of pennies. Now, Davinia is not alone. Far from it. She's part of a growing movement, and there's a name for people like Davinia: global citizens. A global citizen is someone who self-identifies first and foremost not as a member of a state, a tribe, or a nation, but as a member of the human race, and someone who's prepared to, thank you, and someone who's prepared to act on that belief to tackle our world's greatest challenges. Our work is focused on finding, supporting, and activating global citizens. They exist in every country and among every demographic. I want to make the case to you today that the world's future depends on global citizens. I'm convinced that if we had more global citizens active in our world, then every single one of the major challenges we face, from poverty, climate change, gender inequality, these issues become solvable. They are ultimately global issues, and they can ultimately only be solved by global citizens demanding global solutions from their leaders. Now, some people's immediate reaction to this idea is that either it's a bit utopian or even threatening. So I'd like to share with you a little of my story today, how I ended up here, how it connects with Davinia, and hopefully with you. Growing up in Melbourne, Australia, I was one of those seriously irritating little kids that never ever stopped asking why. You might have been one yourself. I used to ask my mum the most annoying questions. I'd ask her questions like, "Mum, why can't I dress up and play with puppets all day? Why do you want fries with that? What is a shrimp, and why do we have to keep throwing them on the Barbie? And Mum, this haircut? Why?" The worst haircut, I think. Still terrible. As a Y kid, I thought I could change the world, and it was impossible to convince me otherwise. And when I was 12 and in my first year of high school, I started raising money for communities in the developing world. And we were a really enthusiastic group of kids, and we raised more money than any other school in Australia. And so I was awarded the chance to go to the Philippines to learn more. It was 1998. We were taken into a slum in the outskirts of Manila. It was there I became friends with Sonny Boy, who lived on what was literally a pile of steaming garbage. Smoky Mountain was what they called it, but don't let the romance of that name fool you, because it was nothing more than a rancid landfill that kids like Sonny Boy spent hours rummaging through every single day to find something, anything of value. That night with Sonny Boy and his family changed my life forever, because when it came time to go to sleep, we simply lay down on this concrete slab the size of half my bedroom with myself, Sonny Boy, and the rest of his family, 7 of us in this long line with this smell of rubbish all around us and cockroaches crawling all around. And I didn't sleep a wink, but I lay awake thinking to myself, why should anyone have to live like this when I have so much? Why should Sonny Boy's ability to live out his dreams be determined by where he's born, or what Warren Buffett called the ovarian lottery? I just didn't get it, and I needed to understand why. Now, I only later came to understand that the poverty I'd seen in the Philippines was the result of decisions made or not made, man-made, by a succession of colonial powers and corrupt governments who had anything but the interests of Sonny Boy at heart. Sure, they didn't create Smoky Mountain, but they may as well have. And if we were to try to help kids like Sonny Boy, it wouldn't work just to try to send him a few dollars or to try to clean up the garbage dump on which he lived, because the core of the problem lay elsewhere. And as I worked on community development projects over the coming years, trying to help build schools, train teachers, and tackle HIV and AIDS, I came to see that community development should be driven by communities themselves, and that although charity is necessary, it's not sufficient. We need to confront these challenges on a global scale and in a systemic way. And the best thing I could do is try to mobilize a large group of citizens back home to insist that our leaders engage in that systemic change. That's why a few years later, I joined with a group of college friends in bringing the Make Poverty History campaign to Australia. We had this dream of staging this small concert around the time of the G20 with local Aussie artists And it suddenly exploded one day when we got a phone call from Bono, The Edge, and Pearl Jam, who all agreed to headline our concert. I got a little bit excited that day, as you can see. But to our amazement, the Australian government heard our collective voices, and they agreed to double investment into global health and development, an additional $6.2 billion. It felt like... It felt like this incredible validation. You know, by rallying citizens together, we helped persuade our government to do the unthinkable and act to fix a problem miles outside of our borders. But here's the thing. It didn't last. See, there was a change in government, and 6 years later, all that new money disappeared. What did we learn? We learned that one-off spikes are not enough. We needed a sustainable movement, not one that is susceptible to the fluctuating moods of a politician or the hint of an economic downturn, and it needed to happen everywhere. Otherwise, every individual government would have this built-in excuse mechanism that they couldn't possibly carry the burden of global action alone. And so this is what we embarked upon. And as we embarked upon this challenge, we asked ourselves, how do we gain enough pressure and build a broad enough army to win these fights for the long term? We could only think of one way. We need to somehow turn that short-term excitement of people involved with the Make Poverty History campaign into long-term passion. It had to be part of their identity. So in 2012, we co-founded an organization that had exactly that as its goal. And there was only one name for it: Global Citizen. But this is not about any one organization. This is about citizens taking action. And research data tells us that of the total population who even care about global issues, only 18% have done anything about it. It's not that people don't want to act, it's often that they don't know how to take action, or that they believe that their actions will have no effect. So we had to somehow recruit and activate millions of citizens in dozens of countries to put pressure on their leaders to behave altruistically. And as we did so, we discovered something really thrilling. That when you make global citizenship your mission, you suddenly find yourself with some extraordinary allies. See, extreme poverty isn't the only issue that's fundamentally global. So too is climate change, human rights, gender equality, even conflict. We found ourselves shoulder to shoulder with people who are passionate about targeting all these interrelated issues. But how did we actually go about recruiting and engaging those global citizens? Well, we used the universal language, music. We launched the Global Citizen Festival in the heart of New York City in Central Park, and we persuaded some of the world's biggest artists to participate. We made sure that these festivals coincided with the UN General Assembly meeting so that leaders who need to hear our voices couldn't possibly ignore them. But there was a twist. You couldn't buy a ticket, you had to earn it. You had to take action on behalf of a global cause, and only once you'd done that could you earn enough points to qualify. Activism is the currency. I had no interest in citizenship purely as some sort of feel-good thing. For me, citizenship means you have to act, and that's what we required. And amazingly, it worked. Last year, more than 155,000 citizens in the New York area alone earned enough points to qualify. Globally, we've now signed up citizens in over 150 countries around the world, and last year we signed up more than 100,000 new members each and every week of the whole year. See, we don't need to create global citizens from nothing. We're already everywhere. We just need to be organized and motivated to start acting. And this is where I believe we can learn a lot from Davinia, who started taking action as a global citizen back in 2012. Here's what she did. It wasn't rocket science. She started writing letters, emailing politicians' offices. She volunteered her time in her local community. That's when she got active on social media and started to collect pennies, a lot of pennies. Now, maybe that doesn't sound like a lot to you. How will that achieve anything? Well, it achieved a lot because she wasn't alone. Her actions, alongside 142,000 other global citizens, led the US government to double their investment into Global Partnership for Education. And here's Dr. Raj Shah, the head of USAID, making that announcement. See, when thousands of global citizens find inspiration from each other, it's amazing to see their collective power. Global citizens like Davinia helped persuade the World Bank to boost their investment into water and sanitation. Here's the bank's president, Jim Kim, announcing $15 billion on stage at Global Citizen. And Prime Minister Modi of India affirmed his commitment to put a toilet in every household and school across India by 2019. Global Citizens, encouraged by the late-night host Stephen Colbert, launched a Twitter invasion on Norway. Ernest Solberg, the country's prime minister, got the message, committing to double investment into girls' education. Global Citizens, together with Rotarians, called on the Canadian, UK, and Australian governments to boost their investment into polio eradication. They got together and committed $665 million. But despite all of this momentum, we face some huge challenges. So you might be thinking to yourself, how can we possibly persuade world leaders to sustain a focus on global issues? Indeed, the powerful American politician Tip O'Neill once said, "All politics is local." That's what always got politicians elected, to seek, gain, and hold on to power through the pursuit of local or, at very best, national interests. I experienced this for the first time when I was 21 years old. I took a meeting with a then Australian Foreign Minister, who shall remain nameless, and behind closed doors, I shared with him my passion to end extreme poverty. I said, "Minister, Australia has this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to help achieve the Millennium Development Goals. We can do this." And he paused, looked down on me with cold, dismissive eyes, and he said, "Hugh, no one gives a funk about foreign aid," except he didn't use the word funk. He went on, he said, "We need to look after our own backyard first." This is, I believe, outdated, even dangerous thinking, or as my late grandfather would say, complete BS. Parochialism offers this false dichotomy because it pits the poor in one country against the poor in another. It pretends we can isolate ourselves and our nations from one another. The whole world is our backyard, and we ignore it at our peril. See, look what happened when we ignored Rwanda, when we ignore Syria, when we ignore climate change. Political leaders ought to give a funk because the impact of climate change and extreme poverty comes right to our shore. Now, global citizens, they understand this. We live in a time that favors the global citizen, in an age where every single voice can be heard. See, do you remember when the Millennium Development Goals were signed back in the year 2000, the most we could do in those days was fire off a letter and wait for the next election. There was no social media. Today, billions of citizens have more tools, more access to information, more capacity to influence than ever before. Both the problems and the tools to solve them are right before us. The world has changed, and those of us who look beyond our borders are on the right side of history. So where are we? So we run this amazing festival, we've scored some big policy wins, and citizens are signing up all over the world. But have we achieved our mission? No. We have such a long way to go. But this is the opportunity that I see. The concept of global citizenship, self-evident in its logic, but until now impractical in many ways, has coincided with this particular moment in which we are privileged to live. We as global citizens now have a unique opportunity to accelerate large-scale positive change around the world. So in the months and years ahead, global citizens will hold world leaders accountable to ensure that the new global goals for sustainable development are tracked and implemented. Global citizens will partner with the world's leading NGOs to end diseases like polio and malaria. Global citizens will sign up in every corner of this globe, increasing the frequency, quality, and impact of their actions. These dreams are within reach. Imagine an army of millions growing into tens of millions, connected, informed, engaged, and unwilling to take no for an answer. Over all these years, I've tried to reconnect with Sonny Boy. Sadly, I've been unable to. We met long before social media, and his address has now been relocated by the authorities, as often happens with slums. I'd love to sit down with him wherever he is and share with him how much the time I spent on Smoky Mountain inspired me. Thanks to him and so many others, I came to understand the importance of being part of a movement of people. The kids willing to look up from their screens and out to the world, the global citizens. Global citizens who stand together, who ask the question why, who reject the naysayers, and embrace the amazing possibilities of the world we share. I'm a global citizen. Are you? Thank you.
So that will be all for the 3 topics of semi-final week 3, which are the global demography, global migration, and global citizenship. So I hope you learned something in this video, and before I end this, I would like to permit Mr. Ardinas to use this video for academic purposes.